Hello and welcome to the CrimeView FireView customer webinar series happening the third Wednesday of every month. My name is Jeremy Johnson, a member of the TriTech marketing team, and I'm glad you've joined us here today for the webinar. One small bit of housekeeping before we begin today's presentation regarding the go-to dashboard. If that dashboard ever collapses on you during the presentation, you can bring that back up by simply clicking on the orange arrow there in the corner, and that will bring the dashboard back into view, and that will also open up the area for you to enter any questions that might come up during the webinar. And you can feel free to type those questions into the question box right there on the dashboard at any point. And at the end of the presentation today, our presenter will take a moment to go through some of those questions and answer them as he's able. And that does bring us to today's topic. We're going to talk through crime suppression strategies with CrimeView from a robbery scenario, and we're happy to have Bob Henry with us today, a senior implementation specialist. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Jeremy. All right, thank you for the intro, and see if I can show my screen here. There we go. So in today's session, we're going to be using CrimeView dashboard to look at and identify, analyze, and assess some emerging crime trends and patterns, as Jeremy specified, looking at a robbery-specific example today. As you may know, there's several different law enforcement methodologies for reducing crime, including intelligence-led policing, problem-oriented policing, community-oriented policing, and evidence-based policing, among others. And all of these policing models embrace the same idea of using information to support the decision-making process. In today's webinar, we plan to use the problem-oriented policing model as our guide. For those who may not know, POP, for short, is a policing strategy that involves the identification and analysis of crime and disorder issues. And there's a lot of great information on the popcenter.org website if you're not familiar with that. So the specific intent of POP is to implement effective, specific and focused strategies that are both tactical or short-term, as well as strategic and long-term to try to control and prevent crime issues in the future. Let's take a quick look at the problem-specific guides from that site. Really a wealth of resources here, everything from alcohol and drug problems to burglary and theft, disorder and nuisance problems, and each one of these guides open up into a very detailed information about how you can address and reduce those problems. So in today's example, I'm going to be relying on the commercial or convenience store robbery guide specifically. So that's great to check out when you have a chance to do that. Let me jump back in my PowerPoint. There we go. Also today, under POP, they have a process that they call SARA. That's a methodology including scanning, analyzing, assessing, and responding to crimes, and also assessing those results. So we'll use the dashboard to first identify the problem, then analyze that in a little more depth to understand some of the underlying causes, the social setting, physical setting, social context, designing a response strategy, which could be any combination of collaborating with the community to determine how to reduce or prevent that issue, and also law enforcement response strategies that might involve directed patrol, for example. And then the last phase of the SARA model is to come back and assess those results. So now, a couple of weeks later, did we have an impact? Did crime go up or down or stay about the same as a result of that intervention effort? And I'll use the POP method in combination with Dr. Jerry Ratcliffe's spatiotemporal hotspot matrix. And this is based on an article that he published back in about 2004, but I think that's still relevant today because it's really interesting how he combines both the spatial dimension with the temporal dimension to try to combine those two to figure out whether if crime is dispersed in space and dispersed in time, or if it's very focused in space and focused in time. For example, a hotspot or a repeat location where you have a specific place and a specific time, you'd have a different response strategy for each of those, which may range from high visibility patrol to putting an officer in foot patrol in a very specific place in a specific time. So that's a great article to be aware of, and it really helps you to perhaps consider what the best response strategy is for a particular issue. So I'm going to jump into the dashboard, and this might look familiar to you in terms of the dashboard page. We have a crime summary, and the dashboard consists of two primary modes. Dashboard where we're tracking and monitoring crime priorities, in this example, violent crimes and property crimes. And then we also have a breakdown of other pages that we're tracking and monitoring more specifically as well. For the sake of time in today's webinar, I'm going to say that we've already determined that commercial robberies are what we want to focus on. So I'm going to select that and bring that data over into analysis mode by clicking on the A button. And we'll carry over the pin map. And so there's the commercial robberies. I'm actually going to rerun this because what it brought over was the entire widget. As you can see, what's in the background is actually all the different violent crimes. So I want to focus this more specifically on just the commercial robberies. So bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to uncheck the other violent crimes, and we'll rerun that. All right, so now we're looking at just the commercial robberies. Let me pull up the charts. And one of the first things that I want to take a look at here, for example, is the premise. And when we chart by this, we can take a look at the legend. We see that there's 7 convenience store robberies, 4 that occurred at a grocery store or supermarket, a few that happened at a restaurant. And we could also subset this by looking at just the convenience store robberies. Or we could look at those that happened in a grocery store. So really quick and easy to filter and subset and drill down into that data. Here's robberies that happened in a parking lot, for example. We could also take a look at this by weapon. I think that's relevant to the robbery crime type. So if we view the legend, we've got actually 16 that involved a handgun. So that's quite a few robberies involving a handgun, and a couple with a knife. So again, just as easy to filter and drill down into those results. And here's those that included a knife. But we'll keep on taking a look at convenience store robbery, or the commercial robberies in general. So we can see that Tuesday, for some reason, stands out from the rest. And that's perhaps contrary to what you might expect from the POP guide, that a lot of the robberies tend to happen on the weekends or late at night. So we can easily drill down into that and take a closer look at that trend or pattern from there. And then also on the right-hand side, we can see that a lot of those robberies are happening in the evening hours. So that's more like what we would generally expect to see for this type of crime. I'm going to move on to the temporal grid, and this helps to better understand the time of day by day of week relationship. And one of the nice things you can do here is you can select by any one of those grids or multiple grids if you want to. So of course, the color coding helps us to understand exactly what days and what times those incidents occurred at. But I'm going to deselect that, and we know that Tuesday stood out for the rest. So I can click on Tuesday on the left-hand side, and that actually autofills all the way across, so we can again see those Tuesday crimes. But looking at this distribution, we can see that it's pretty spread across all times on the day of Tuesday. So just something to consider there. And we could also take a look at, we see a lot of these are happening in the later evening hours. So you can click on those times, and it fills out those rows there. So really easy to interact, drill down, and get results fast. Next, let's take a look at the time sequencer. And this helps you to see whether crime has spiked on a certain day in the recent past. So each bar represents a different day. The light blue bars represent the weekends, and the dark blue bars are weekdays, essentially Monday through Friday. And I'm going to bring in this window so I can just look at 1 week at a time. So here looking at week 2 of January of this year. And one other tip that you might be interested in is if you roll the mouse wheel, that'll actually bring up the days. So if you're looking at a wider time range, it'll generally group it by the week or the month or the quarter. And if you roll the mouse wheel, you can actually see the days of which those bars represent. So from here, we can see these are the incidents that happened in this particular week. Up in the top left-hand corner, we've got 6 records, and we can step forward through those results to the next week, so it just advances the same number of days that you have selected in that window. And so, as a brief look at this, you can see that more happened here just based on the bars and the height of those bars. And then going into this week, we've got 3. And so I'll continue stepping forward. There wasn't really any robberies that happened in this week here in week 4. Then week 5, we've got 1. And we got 5 again. 1. So we'll step through to the end. And at the end, we can actually see that there has been a spike recently. So maybe we want to take a look at those records and focus in more on these incidents here. So with these selected, we've got 4 commercial robberies that we're looking at. The next step might be to take a look at the table, and we can see those 4 records here. Now let's take a look through this, the attributes to see if there's any commonalities between these. And if we scroll over to the right, you can see a couple of them happened at a convenience store. And of those that happened at a convenience store, they also happened on the same day. And they also happened within a couple of hours of each other. So that might be something we want to take a closer look at. And we'll continue scrolling over to the right. And here we can see those 2 that we selected also involved a handgun. And looking up on top on the map, we can see that those also kind of occurred along the same area or the same corridor as well. And then down here, we've got another one that involved a handgun. If we look at that back in the attributes over here, well, these 2 happened at a convenience store, and this one happened at a gas station. So those are possibly similar to each other as well. So we're looking at possibly a crime spree here where there's a lot of similarities. And then we also have a modus operandi field that gives us even more detail. And this really helps to bring out confirm that possible trend or series. So we see that the suspect wore a ski mask in this one, and they used threats. And then we see this one below it, they also wore a ski mask, and they used threats as well. And this last one down here, they were wearing a ski mask and pointed the weapon. And over to the right, there's an evidence field. So here we can see that they used a 9mm handgun. And again, they reported a 9mm handgun and one more, another similarity there. So at this point, I think we can say that those, given they all happened in the last couple of days and they involved a handgun, we probably have a spree going on here. So at this point, you might want to notify the detectives and continue doing some additional investigative work. And then we can also, in the report grid, use the options and create a selection filter because we have that one extra record that we don't believe is related to the others. So we can use that to create a selection filter, and then it removes that extra record. To get more information about these cases, you might want to zoom in on one of those locations, and perhaps you want to talk to the officer who wrote that report. So when he's back in the office, you could talk to him, pull up Google Street View, and this is the sit-go where that incident occurred. Let's pass it a little bit. And perhaps information comes in from an eyewitness that says that they saw the suspect hiding behind a dumpster, and then after they hid behind the dumpster, then they came around and robbed the store when nobody was around. And also, they could potentially use oblique view if there was other information. For example, this is our sit-go convenience store or gas station, and maybe they came through the back parking lot, ran through the trees, hid behind the dumpster, and then into the store. So it just helps to connect the real world with the mapping environment and helping to tell and illustrate the complete story. Switch back to dashboard there. So now that we have that information, maybe perhaps the next step is to design a response strategy. So I'm going to jump back into my PowerPoint real quick. And we were talking about the spatiotemporal hotspot matrix. So now we might want to consider, well, how would we want to respond in terms of directed patrol to that particular pattern? So thinking about in this context, most of the robberies are happening late at night, early in the morning, and also they're happening at fixed known locations. So they're all gas stations and convenience stores. So with that being in mind, we might want to map out just those types of places. So you might already have a points of interest layer that has that as a category or as a GIS layer to add that in. So we can map those out and use the combination of they're focused in time and focused at places. So we want to look at and try to prevent crimes and anticipate crimes potentially at those locations and use additional surveillance, CCTV, and let me go to the next slide here. We've identified the at-risk locations, communicate with the ownership of those places, potentially to hire private security, harden the targets, and try to prevent crime through possibly installing a fence or things like that, and directed patrol at specific places and specific times, and maybe increase FI so that we can try to gather more information about these cases. And then we also talked about the hotspot matrix, where it's focused in time, focused in space, which leads to those types of recommendations as well. And let me go back to the dashboard. So now that we have these three incidents, as a part of that process, we can share out with patrol that the order, the sequence of these incidents, even though they happened on a couple consecutive days, this was actually the first one, and then they went to hit this location. And credit to Dean Daniels that he came up with this creative idea of putting in an arrow to show the order. Double click to finish. And then I can save that into my crime series. Note group. And I have a description to put in there. We can publish this to Near Me, which is our mobile application. and add in attachments. So if you have a bolo that you've already created a PDF or a JPEG, then we can add that in here too. Okay, so that creates the spatial note that the officers can then see. You have the description of what that person looks like. Perhaps a new FI's come in and we've got a more detailed description of them. And also the attachment that we added in. So we can share that out with the officers or possibly talk about that in roll call before the shift. And speaking of Near Me, which is an add-on module to the dashboard, I'll bring that up here. So this is something that would be installed typically on the MDC devices, which is GPS based. And let me turn these things off. We'll start out with a blank map. And what we're looking at here is this is the officer's position. You can see him driving around town, GPS enabled, and this helps to make him more situationally aware of what's going on around him. So given that he's driving a robbery detail, we might want to turn on the robbery crimes and also some of the FIs that have been written about robbery as well, and the robbery arrests. So it really helps to get him access to information while he's out there in the field to make him more productive. So you can see those persons, you can see the events that have happened recently, and of course much more that's possible with the Near Me app as well. But let me show you real quick the note that we published. And so we published this note here, the purple one. So there's the robbery bolo note that we published, and also they would have access to that same JPEG while they're out there in the field. All right, so I'm going to jump back into the dashboard. And given that we know that this particular offender is targeting convenience stores, as I mentioned previously, we could also overlay the actual convenience store locations. So here I've added it as a spatial note, which you can always do, but if you had an operational layer, you could add that in as well. So this gives some details about contacting the store owner, discuss target hardening or crime prevention strategies, private security, increased law enforcement in and around these areas. With the intent being that, well, if they're hitting convenience stores, then are they going to go back to the same place? Or are they going to hit a new place? But generally, that's kind of what their MO is. So that helps to stay focused on that. All right, so I think that covers the response strategy. And next, let's say maybe a couple of weeks later, after patrol's done, we want to come back and assess those results. We've got a briefing book already created for the assessment of those robbery incidents. So we can see, did the officers actually carry through with the plan that we had? This compares the current period versus the previous period. So we're looking at a 14-day window, current 14 days up on top and previous 14 days on the bottom. This is using a stats interval type of widget. And you can see that, well, actually the number of robberies has reduced, which I would say is a good thing. So that, I guess that means we're preventing crimes in some capacity. And also looking at the FIs, we can see, well, did they increase FI activity or not? And in and around those robbery or those convenience store locations specifically. And in this case, the number of FIs is actually down, which is contrary to what we might have expected. And more specifically, they did not conduct FIs around a couple of those stores. So that could be something to share back with those officers, that we need FIs not only in these areas, but also these areas over here as well. And then last but not least, we have the arrests for current and previous. So let's take a look at the current arrest. And this happens to be all arrests, but we can go into the charts and we can use the crime category. And we could look at the robbery arrests specifically. So we got a couple of them. Got this one here. And that links to a few things, but that's not the one that we're looking for. And let me turn that one off. And also we've got this one here. And check out the linked records for that. Include the linked lines. So the red lines are linking over here to a couple of robbery incidents. And it happens that these are actually the same robbery incidents that we've been talking about during today's webinar. So they did actually make an arrest for those 3 robbery events. And we can take a closer look at that. This is linking those based on having the same case number, but I can also look at the same social security number, driver's license. It links in a variety of different ways to a variety of different data sets. So we have links going to CAD and citations, but those aren't exactly what we're looking for. It's these robbery commercial incidents that we're looking at. And again, we can see those same dates and times here, cleared by arrest. And the modus operandi where they wore a ski mask, where the evidence was they used a 9mm handgun. And so that now at this point we can confirm that they did make an arrest for that ongoing recent crime spree. So I think that brings today's webinar to a close, but I'll welcome any questions that you may have.
We don't have any in the queue at the moment here, Bob, but we'll give folks a moment to type something in if it popped into their brains here at the end of your presentation. So we'll give it just a couple minutes here and see if anything comes up. Well, Bob, you must have covered it in perfect entirety because we don't have any questions popping up here. So thank you for. Oh, yes, we do have one. No question, but Ross is very grateful for the webinar. So appreciates what you folks are doing. So there you go, a feather in your cap today.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Doesn't look like anything else is coming in at this point, Bob.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thanks everyone, and have a good day.